So hello everybody, this is Bhante Joe here, and just here at Endagala in the middle of the forest here, and thought to record a short Awada for the internet. So thought that maybe could start with just a little bit of meditation, so can lean forward a little bit and arch our spine, and look about 3 feet in front, and close our eyes. And we can think thoughts of goodwill, spreading goodwill to our right hand side, wishing may all beings to my right be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can make our minds infinite, can make them unbounded, all the way to the ends of the universe and beyond, in every dimension. May all beings to my right be happy and at ease. And we can spread thoughts of goodwill to our right hand side and our left hand side. May all beings to my right and my left be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can spread thoughts of goodwill to our right hand side, our left hand side, and in front. May all beings to my right, my left, and in front be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can spread thoughts of goodwill to our right hand side, our left hand side, in front and behind, in all 4 directions. May all beings in all 4 directions be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can spread thoughts of goodwill to our right hand side, our left hand side, in front, behind, and above. May all beings in all 4 directions and above be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can spread thoughts of goodwill to our right hand side, our left hand side, in front, behind, above, below, all around in every direction everywhere. May all beings all around in every direction everywhere be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can make our minds infinite, can make them unbounded, all the way to the ends of the universe and beyond, in every dimension. May all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease. And can open our eyes and do a short reflection on the Dhamma. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Saṅghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Saṅghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Saṅghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. So, hope that everybody is having a great day, wherever might be in the world. And yeah, just came down here today with another gentleman from Canada. We did some chanting of the Dhammacakka Sutta, which was quite nice. And now this is a kind of place that's in the forest, so don't actually have to go on any major roads or anything like that. It's kind of Sri Lanka at the current time has a kind of a curfew where you have to, you're supposed to stay in your house. And so at this kind of time, where there's this kind of virus, many people worried about this virus, and the authorities encouraging people to stay inside. One of the things that have been seen kind of online is that, kind of this opportunity for people to meditate in solitude. And actually, this is one of the things that comes highly recommended by the Buddha, is kind of meditating in solitude. Actually, most of the suttas, the kind of stock phrase for somebody who achieves nibbana is that they usually they go hear as some kind of like a message from the Buddha, a short gatha or short words of encouragement. Then they go off on their own somewhere, and it says dwelling heedful, ardent, and resolute. They kind of achieve the destruction of the taints. And kind of, just paraphrasing here, but generally that's the phrase. And so living as a monk, one of the things that you're supposed to train in is solitude. It's kind of living alone, not talking to other people except when necessary, not engaging in other people when necessary. And after sometimes after the end of a long, hard work week or kind of busy week, you can say, okay, some solitude is a good thing. One of the interesting things about solitude is that the Buddha actually says that this is one of the most difficult. This is kind of something difficult to delight in. Delighting in solitude is something that's not easy for a person to do. And for monks, actually, when you're a junior monk, when you're very just new to Buddhism, usually you want to go off on your own and practice alone and kind of not be around anybody. You want to do that like right away. But usually the senior monks will kind of encourage you to wait around the monastery for a while and, basically get used to the routines of the monastery, get used to your life as a monk and get kind of grounding in your life as a monk before you're allowed to go off on your own. So the usual period for this is actually 5 years. So you kind of spend 5 years living at least close to a teacher before you're generally allowed to go off, say, to the wilderness and just live alone. And this is because the practice of spending time alone, it's kind of like lifting free weights. So I remember kind of going to the gym when I was a kind of young man and liking to lift these kind of weights. And they'd have these machines which kind of if you want to do like a butterfly curl and work your pecs, then you have this machine that makes sure you do the form properly. You basically you can't really mess the form up too much. Or if you want to kind of they have these machines for like curls, they have machines for bench presses, and the machine sets it up so that, even if you lift too much weight, if it comes crashing down, the machine will stop it for you. But then they have another type of weight, which is called free weights. And kind of, I think many people maybe know this if they've gone to the gym. And this is a type of weight where there's basically no machine around, nobody to spot you. But the thing about lifting free weights is that you tend to be stronger when lifting free weights. And one of the reasons for this is that you have to use these kind of extra muscles, these stabilizer muscles, in addition to your, in addition to your usual muscles to do whatever the curl is. And as a result, if somebody lifts weights freestyle, lifts these kind of free dumbbells or goes on, the big free barbell press machine, you can become stronger lifting those than you could lifting the machine. You have to use all of your strength to do it. And so you become much stronger generally. But there's a catch to that. Okay? The catch is that if you don't do the form correctly, if you're not well established in the form, then you can easily injure yourself. And so this kind of is a little bit similar with spending a lot of time alone, a lot of time in solitude. Actually there was one monk when I went to visit Thailand one time, and like most junior monks at that time, I was kind of really looking forward to going and getting some time alone, or kind of, practicing outside of a community, not having a community around. And this senior monk came to the monastery, and he'd been kind of living alone, at kind of a hermitage for a number of years, I think more than 10 years. And I asked him what it was like what are the advantages of living? I think that's a question I asked, as far as I remember. What are the advantages of living at a hermitage alone? What are the disadvantages? And what he said to me was, if you live in a community, then it's like you have a floor and a ceiling. So in other words, you can only go so low, and the community will support you. They'll stop you from falling any lower. But the routines of the community as well make it so you can only go so high. You kind of go so low, go so high. You're kind of modulated a bit. And this is to generally teach one the form, and kind of like lifting these free weights. So, you start with like a machine, or you start with a guide, and they teach you the proper form, ideally until that form becomes second nature. And he said the thing about living alone, living in solitude, is that basically there's no limit, more or less, to how high you can go, but there's also no limit, more or less, to how low you can go. So on the kind of heard this one story one time from a senior monk, and he said he met a monk who made a vow never to leave this monastery until he was living alone, I think, on a mountain. He made a vow never to leave that monastery until he achieved enlightenment. But I think he ended up going crazy. It's kind of a sad story instead. And so he left that way, and he ended up in an insane asylum. And so this is one of the warnings that the Buddha has for us when we go to live alone, is that there's a sutta where he says, the wood steal the mind of a person who doesn't gain concentration. There's kind of this story where the person who was the chief expert in the Vinaya wanted to go live alone, and he said, wait, stay with the community. And then he went through and said, it's when my disciples see they have the first jhana, when they have the second jhana, the third jhana, that they go live alone in isolated forest and wilderness dwellings. Now in the Buddha's day, this would usually mean kind of like living really alone, kind of going off to like a forest with with nobody around except the villagers, maybe not even a monastery too close by that one could go to, and spending time there just by oneself. Some of these forest dwellings in the jungle, they might be, an hour's walk into the jungle, and then one goes out for pindapat and then comes back, and that's it for the day. So this time of kind of self-isolation, a little bit different than that, but there still may be some things that can carry over for people. And one of the things that one of the monks who there was another senior monk, I don't usually list their names, but he had this thing: when you're living with the community, act like you're living alone. When you're living alone, act like you're living with the community. So if one is living with a number of people, as a monk at least, then one is to act like one's living alone. So don't talk to people much, and basically just go back to your kuti and meditate. But then if one's living alone, which is the kind of situation now, then one is to live like one's living with other people. So in other words, one makes a schedule for one's day, and then one sticks to that schedule. One of the reasons for this is that basically if one goes living alone, because there's this opportunity to go really high or really low, if one doesn't already have an established routine of living alone, then one of the dangers of living alone is that a person can start to resort to entertainment, start to resort to these various other things, And what these things act like is kind of like a cover-up for the mind. So I remember I was one time had this simile, kind of, imagine if, a kind of a dog or something made a mess on the floor, and a person kind of covered it up with a mat, covered it up with another mat. Every time it smelled more, they'd cover it up, with some more mats. Eventually that kind of, that single mess would spread to, infest mold throughout a person's entire house, could even maybe rot the floorboards. And so in a similar way, when one lives alone, one has to be careful to dwell ardent, what they call heedful, ardent, and resolute. In other words, if a person goes alone and then resorts to distraction, then the problems that are small in one's mind can start to get amplified. When one's with a group of people, those problems tend to only go so high or so low. But if one isn't actively always kind of controlling one's mind when living alone, then these problems start to spin out of control. So one of the images that one teacher really uses a lot, which is quite appropriate, is like a feedback loop. So you put you take one microphone and put it next to a speaker, and the sound from the whatever ambient sound there is feeds into the speaker and feeds back to the microphone. Eventually you get this kind of this very loud sound. And in a similar way, when a person is alone, if their thoughts aren't guarded, if their thoughts aren't controlled, they tend to spin in these loops. And kind of, it starts like a small thought and then grows larger. Every time one thinks about it, that perception grows larger and larger. And without a group of people or a community to check that thought, it can spin out of control. So this is one of the dangers of living alone. That's why one lives alone, one has to dwell heedful, ardent, and resolute. So in other words, one can make this schedule, okay, today I'm going to do this, this time. I mean, you can't, maybe people wouldn't, would schedule some time for TV or whatever it might be, or as a monk you wouldn't do that. As a monk you would have, ideally your day would be devoted to the Dhamma. But in any event, that schedule at least will help to check one's mind so that any stray impulse comes up, it runs up against the schedule, at least until one gets used to living alone. And when one gets used to these stray impulses, one starts to learn to be able to tell the difference between which ones one should follow and which ones one shouldn't. So this is one of the things about kind of a living alone, is to try to make sure that the mind is heedful. In other words, it's devoted towards some wholesome activity, some purposeful activity. When one is living alone, one's time should be structured in such a way that it's heedful, that it's ardent, that it's resolute. And this helps cut the mind to these feedback loops. So one of the things now is that there's actually quite a lot, maybe on the news about, coronavirus and the dangers of coronavirus, and which countries have the most death rates and how many people have died and, yesterday from coronavirus and these various things. And not to say that that news is totally unreasonable to watch. But in a time when many people are living alone, or if one is forced to spend a lot of time alone, it might be one possibility, at least that works for monks, is to try to kind of check the amount that one might do of watching that. In other words, try to think, is this really necessary for me to watch for my informational purposes, or is it not? Because one of the dangers of living alone, of having the mind in these feedback loops, one of the dangerous ones that can come up is this feedback loop of fear. Another one is a feedback loop of regret. It's kind of fear and regret, they go together in a sense. In the Buddha's defilement, it's called uddhacca kukucca. It's kind of restlessness, remorse, they kind of come under that. I guess it kind of come under that, it's kind of restlessness and remorse. But in any event, this kind of fear can feed in on itself. Yeah, that might not be totally accurate. Restlessness and remorse, not fear and remorse. But in any event, those two can come up. And this fear can feed back in on itself. So one kind of watches a news story, 700 people died, what's next? What's going to happen next? That can kind of create this feedback loop in the mind that isn't checked by a community of people. And especially if many people are feeding into this, it can create this fear that's actually negative, that becomes a kind of kilesa. So if one is spending time alone, one of the things that one can do is to try to, in that schedule, limit the amount of time one spends watching news. I mean, it might be necessary to know, what the health authorities say should be done, or, how much, if you like here, there's a curfew, it's good to know when the curfew is lifted so you can go out, or, maybe generally to know the outlines of the situation. But if one finds oneself watching 2-3 hours of news at night, this could be something that can become negative in a feedback loop. But the other side of this kind of living alone is it isn't just, the dangers of negative things. There are the benefits of positive things. So when one dwells this way, kind of living alone, living heedfully, what you might call the heedfulness or the mindfulness actually can generate its own feedback loop, which is the opposite, which is positive. So what one wants to do as a monk, at least, when one goes to live alone, one goes alone ideally to practice meditation. In other words, to train one's mind to lean towards wholesome qualities, to train one's mind to be in the present moment over and over again, to bring one's mind more and more under control, so that whatever one's mind is directed towards countering negative tendencies of mind. And when one lives alone like this can kind of build quite a lot of momentum, because when one engages with other people, then that kind of momentum can tend to dissipate. Okay, you've had this kind of, momentum going, building up, doing your meditation. All of a sudden you engage with other people and your mind is distracted for that period of time. These kind of unwanted thoughts can slip in, slowly. So this is an ideal time, if one has a meditation practice, to engage in it, to really devote oneself to that meditation practice. And the thing about dwelling, for one to dwell heedful, ardent, and resolute in this way, is it doesn't have to be this kind of like heroic action necessarily. It's kind of like more like a person going to university. So if you go to university, you don't drink, one wouldn't drink like 5 cups of coffee and, 2 cups of tea and then stay awake for, 3 or 4 or 5 days and, finally get your degree. It's more like one learns to develop a lifestyle where one is studying a lot consistently. And over time, that lifestyle builds up to the point where one gains quite a lot of knowledge. So in the same way with our meditation practice, when we're dwelling alone, it doesn't have to be this thing where it's like a 100-meter sprint. Yeah? It can be more this thing where it's like a journey of 100 miles, and we're trying to develop a system or a schedule of practice where we can do it again and again, day in, day out, and slowly build it, slowly let it grow. The advantages of doing this well, the advantage of learning to live on one's own well, is that one actually becomes less dependent on the external world. One's happiness, one's kind of joy, one's stability depends less on external things and more on one's own ability to train one's mind. And this is when a person starts to gain a true refuge in the Dhamma. So the Dhamma has these external refuges. It has various refuges that one can make in giving, all these various things which are excellent and provide a good foundation for this kind of living alone, dwelling heedful, ardent, and resolute. The sila, keeping morality, provides a good foundation. And on top of all these things, one builds one's meditation practice so that one starts to enjoy living alone. This is one of the reflections that monks have for themselves is, do I delight in an empty dwelling? And it's kind of, when one goes to an empty dwelling, does one delight there? Thinking, now I can practice meditation. Is one gaining a sense of ease in one's meditation practice? Is one gaining a sense that one's moving forward? Does one see one's defilements that one used to have falling away? Because when one becomes engaged in the practice in this way, it's a kind of happy pursuit. It's a pursuit that doesn't rely on much at all. It relies on food, it relies on clothes, it relies on shelter, it relies on medicine, and it relies on one's own mind. And it builds up. It's like having this kind of microphone next to a speaker so that it, the sound starts small and builds larger and larger and larger and larger. And the nice thing about being alone is that it's like having these kind of noise-canceling headphones. So all these kind of sounds that are outside get subsided, and one can listen to the thoughts in one's mind very clearly. One can direct them very clearly. And so long as one directs them well, they build towards higher levels of happiness. So this is one of the potentials of living alone. Of course, it kind of builds higher than that. The ultimate aim of living alone, of practicing in this way, is to come to an end of one's defilements. But in this short period of time, when many people are forced to live alone, one can at least, using some of these methods that the teachers have taught us, we can kind of learn to see the joy in living alone. We can learn to see the joy in practicing with our own mind. We can learn to see the joy that comes when our meditation starts to progress, when we see it progressing, when our negative thoughts start to fall away, when we see them falling away. We can come to learn the joy that comes when our mind becomes bright, when it enters into states of concentration. And these are types of happiness that are completely apart from the happinesses of the world. And this is when one gains a sense of refuge that becomes more true, because whether or not coronavirus grows or escalates or whatever might happen, one always has this kind of kamma that one creates with one. When one is breathing one's last breath, if one gets coronavirus, if one doesn't get coronavirus, all the time one's mind is with one. And so one gains a kind of sense of confidence that comes from dwelling this way appropriately, dwelling heedful, ardent, and resolute. It's a sense of confidence that leads one onwards, leads one from developing good thoughts to having happy states of mind to seeing one's defilements fall away. Because at the end of this type of practice is the destruction of one's defilements so that they don't arise again. And this is the true refuge. It's a refuge that lies beyond the world, beyond the problems of the world. That's to be found by turning inwards, by practicing alone, heedful, ardent, and resolute, until one becomes another one of the arahants, another one of the Buddha's true disciples. Okay, so leave that for reflection, and hope that everybody has a great day wherever it may be, and wishing you all the best till next time.